That annual meeting took 22 minutes and 30 seconds by the stopwatch. Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you for electing me to the new board. I'd like to take the pleasure of welcoming our speaker tonight, Dr. Jack Jedwab. Dr. Jedwab is a native of Montreal. He's served for the past 3 years as Executive Director for the Quebec region of the Canadian Jewish Congress. He's also a Director of the National Unity Committee of the Canadian Jewish Congress. Dr. Jedwab has lectured at McGill University and the University of Quebec at Montreal on topics such as minorities in Quebec, the history of immigration in Quebec, and cultural communities and Quebec politics. His master's thesis at McGill University dealt with Montreal's English daily press and Anglophone voting behavior between 1935 and 1956. His doctoral thesis at Concordia University contrasted public finance in Ontario and Quebec between 1867 and 1896. Recent works include a book entitled English in Montreal, A Layman's Look at the Current Situation, and a soon-to-be-published book on heritage languages in Canada. Dr. Jedwab has served on a number of very interesting committees, including the Government of Quebec Advisory Council on Family Policy, the Quebec Human Rights Commission Committee on Violence and Racism, and the Montreal Urban Community Committee on Intercultural and Interracial Relations. Dr. Jedwab will give us some insight into the Montreal situation and perhaps explain why we have more Montreal bagels per capita now in Ottawa than anywhere else in North America. Dr. Jedwab.
Well, I want to begin by saying thank you for inviting me to come and address you here this evening. And I do want to note the efficiency of your electoral process. For those of us from Quebec who have encountered in the past 15 years 2 referendums and what I would say in all fairness is virtually an election every year, at least going back to 1992, beginning with Charlottetown then, and municipal election the following year, provincial election the following year, referendum the following year. I think, wait a sec, last year we've had a break last year. So that, and we'll probably have another 2 elections next year. So I did want to, as I say, applaud the rapidity or speed with which you've gone through the process that you did. I'd like to commend you for that. When I'm invited, whether it's here or elsewhere in the country, to talk about the situation of the Montreal Jewish community, obviously there's certain connotations that immediately come to mind for the audience that I'm addressing. It's very unusual, for example, to invite a speaker to come talk about the Toronto situation with the Toronto Jewish community or the Vancouver Jewish community or the situation of the Winnipeg Jewish community, and I suppose you rarely hear about the situation of the Hamilton Jewish community. And in effect, to the extent that you would hear about the situation of any one of those communities from some speaker from any one of those respective cities, they would probably talk about the issue of continuity. That is to say, the extent to which Jewish identity is being maintained and the dynamics within a given community around issues of continuity. They will not talk about the political ramifications of what is going on in that particular area on the Jewish community, other than trying to, in the case of Toronto, help you understand, or hear for that matter, what the ramifications are of the Mike Harris government's cuts to social service spending or education on the community. So most of you know that when someone comes to talk about the situation of the Montreal Jewish community, in a nutshell, what they are referring to is the coexistence of that community with a phenomenon of nationalism in Quebec that has endured through most of this century and has had multiple expressions and an important impact on the Jewish community of Montreal. Now, let's not fool ourselves either. This is Ottawa, so Ottawa is not particularly far from Montreal, and therefore it's not as though I'm in Vancouver. The further west one goes, I wouldn't say the more curiosity there is about the situation of the Montreal Jewish community, but the more distance certainly there is, and there isn't the same knowledge, I would say, out in Vancouver, or for that matter in Calgary and Edmonton, about the state of things in Montreal, and for that matter about Quebec politics in general, as there would be in a place like Ottawa. Because in Ottawa, we all know we're neighbors. And in that sense, most of you in this room probably either have some family or good friends in Montreal within the Jewish community, or you've known someone who's left in the last 15 or 20 years. Or, in effect, you are a former Montrealer, and you've come here over the past 15, 20 or so years. So, in that sense, all of you will have a better idea, I would say, of what the situation is in Montreal than would someone who is at a further distance from the city. And, in fact, I was, in thinking through this issue, making note that there are probably more readers of the Montreal Gazette in the city of Ottawa than there are in many, many parts of Quebec outside Montreal. You know, and in fact, there are probably more readers of the Montreal Gazette in Ottawa than there are of any other community outside Quebec. Usually when I come here, and I come here about 6 to 8 times a year, and I leave very early in the morning, I get my Gazette here in Ottawa. Now, I don't want to say this, by the way, as an advertisement for the Gazette. I want to be clear that, you know, that's not necessarily the #1 source of true information about the situation, though, you know, it's one of the best reflections or perspectives you're going to get as a reader of English media. I usually do my fill. When I wake up in the morning, I go through about 4 or 5 newspapers right away, beginning with the Journal de Montréal, which is the equivalent, I suppose, of the Ottawa Sun here, go through the sports section of that, and then move on to the real news in La Presse, Le Devoir, the Gazette, and the Globe and Mail. So that, again, here you'll have more of a perspective, the conclusion, at least, that I'm making on what the situation is in Montreal. Now, there's not one perspective on what the situation is with respect to the Jewish community, or for that matter, the broader political situation in Montreal. You know, you may hear from some people a unanimous point of view as to what the Jewish community is encountering. For example, around the time of Passover of I guess it's over a year ago, we had a particularly painful and unpleasant incident involving the labeling of kosher products for that particular holiday period. And if you would read this story across the North American media, I'm not downplaying it at all. I was very much involved in it, and I think it was unfortunate, regrettable, stupid, if you wish. But the impression one got across North America from some of the media I read is there's no kosher food available in Montreal around Passover. All the kosher food is being removed from the shelves of supermarkets in Montreal. In fact, I still hear that to this day. People ask me when I travel to the States, to people who've read this incident, which I don't think I have to go through with all of you, what are you doing for kosher food over Passover? Well, you know, I travel to Ottawa to see what I can pick up. Even though the reality is a lot of people come from Ottawa to Montreal to get their kosher food products, because we have a fairly good supply, notwithstanding the stupidity of some people involved in the labeling requirements of the kosher products, at least at that particular time. We negotiated an arrangement with the government agency responsible for the labeling, and I must tell you, given the mood of the community, of the Jewish community of Montreal, or many parts of that community, the very negotiation of arrangement with this particular agency was a source of tremendous, tremendous controversy. I was on the receiving end of some very, very unpleasant comments with regard to the negotiation of this arrangement, as much as being referred to as Judenrat, including by colleagues of mine at B'nai B'rith, who would have, I believe, I know, unfortunately, I wish someone from B'nai B'rith were here, who would have wanted to be involved in the actual negotiation of that particular arrangement at the beginning, notwithstanding the charge to which we were subjected after the negotiation was complete. I must tell you at the same time on this very interesting anecdote that we are having difficulty with the federal government, and there have been cases before, still pending in federal courts around this very labeling issue involving kosher products. So it's not uniquely a Quebec provincial issue, again, without downplaying its stupidity. So let me go through at least 4 or 5 areas that I think will help in terms of some description of what the condition is of the Montreal Jewish community, again, presuming your familiarity to some extent with some of the issues. First of all, the demographics in the Montreal Jewish community. It was a community in 1971 of about 125,000 persons, and today it is a community of about 100,000 people. And we'll know in about 3-4 months, when the new census data appears, whether it's still 100,000 or it is in effect somewhere in the neighborhood of 98,000. That's what my estimate is. I believe it'll be a couple of thousand less than what it is now. But I don't believe it'll be particularly lower, significantly lower than that, especially since the census was taken some 4 or 5 months after the referendum. So that in that regard, I don't think you'll get an actual number reflecting whatever movement may have occurred in a 1.5-year period after that referendum campaign. So there still is a significant loss, and that significant loss of some 25,000 people, again, looking at the number of people who've left and the number of people who've come, because in effect we have had probably about 10,000 people who've come over that, at least maybe 15,000 over that 25-year period, and about 40,000, say, that have left. Again, this is a complex way of measuring it, but the result of it is that the 65-plus population in Montreal is somewhere in the neighborhood of 23 or 24%. Nearly 1 out of 4 people in the Montreal Jewish community are over the age of 65, which is well above the Quebec average and well above the Canadian average for Jewish communities and for the Canadian population in general in an urban area. And that's the source of having to redefine the way in which community services are offered, because in effect you're dealing with the needs of a very large 65-plus community, a very large 75-plus community, and at the same time you want to have a critical mass of young people in the community, and therefore significant dollars have been invested in programs that we describe as youth retention programs designed to encourage young members of the community to stay in Montreal. We have one such program that's gained some notoriety, which we call Pro-Montreal. And Pro-Montreal tries to focus, or does focus, on offering employment opportunities for members of our community. It's kind of an accelerated version of Jewish vocational services. There are other programs involving creating many cultural opportunities for younger members of the community as possible, and a variety of related initiatives, all under the Pro-Montreal banner. But one thing Pro-Montreal can't do or does not do is control the political climate in the province. And therefore, at a certain stage, we have gone through debates within the Montreal Jewish community at the leadership level as to whether this positive message of stay in Montreal is fair to the extent that there are people who will want to make a decision based on their level of comfort in regard to the political situation within the province. And that is something we cannot guarantee, we can't offer any guarantees for, because it's not something that is entirely within the control, or even partially within the control, of the Montreal Jewish community. So that's something to be kept in mind, at least insofar as the demographics are concerned, and the way in which we're dealing with some of the problems arising from the situation that I've just described. Institutionally, we are a very, very strong community. I think that those of you who have some familiarity, friends, family, or contact with the Montreal Jewish community are aware that from an institutional standpoint, it is a very, very strong community. By any standards, by North American standards, it's probably on average one of the strongest, if not the strongest, community in terms of such things as fundraising on a per capita basis. Of course, if the Bronfmans would move, it might change things, but that's another issue. But from a fundraising standpoint, it is a very strong community. From the standpoint of Jewish identification, it is an extremely strong community. It has one of the lowest levels of exogamy, that is marriage outside the community in North America. It has one of the highest levels of synagogue attendance in North America. It has the highest level of consumption, I would say, of Jewish food products, etc., etc. We can go on and on. I can give you a list of features that would make the Jewish community of Montreal a distinct or unique one in terms of maintenance of Jewish identity in North America. There's no, I didn't mean anything. Nothing was intended in the use of the words distinct or unique. And another feature of the community is it is probably the most trilingual Jewish community in North America, to the extent that it speaks in English, French, Hebrew, Yiddish, Spanish, etc., etc. There's a high degree of knowledge of several languages amongst the Jewish community, which is, I think, a source of great enrichment. So, from a cultural standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an institutional one, it is quite a vibrant community. From the standpoint of Jewish day schools, the situation in Montreal is the envy of many Jewish communities in North America. We have 24 Jewish day schools. Approximately 50% of the funding of such schools is provided by the provincial government. There are debates going on right now about the levels of funding as the government, in its quest to cut back, is reducing slightly from year to year the level of funding. But notwithstanding that, our Jewish day school system is a model for many day school systems across the continent, particularly in the United States where there's no funding. But even by Canadian standards, it ranks very high. Anti-Semitism. Now here's an issue that there's a lot of opinion or controversy about, and there's a very, very strong, deeply rooted perception that there is a rampant or pervasive anti-Semitism in Quebec. In fact, this is a very, very touchy issue. When I travel, the further west I go, I don't have to go that far west, in fact, but when I go to Vancouver, you listen to people in the Jewish community there, and they believe that we are living on the verge of some imminent pogrom in Montreal. I don't want to generalize. It's not the entire community, but there are a few people who genuinely believe that this is the situation of the Montreal Jewish community with respect to anti-Semitism. And their source of information generally is media-oriented. It's every time there's an incident of anti-Semitism in Montreal, which is carried on the front page of most major newspapers, one can get the impression that the situation is such that there is a very, very high level of anti-Semitism, and that's the suggestion is that the source of that anti-Semitism is from the French-Canadian, French-speaking population of Quebec. We're not without incidents. There's no question about that. Over the past 5 years, there's the famous story of this now we go back 10 years, in fact, during the 10th anniversary of the famous Outremont controversy with the Hasidic Jews and La Presse story about the problème juif à Outremont, which generated a lot of controversy, although I think in the end the outcome was not a bad one. It actually generated a lot of good educational work, sensitization of the population around that particular incident. There have been other incidents, the famous Pierre Pelletot issue, where Mr. Pelletot said that Jews take up too much space. I ran into Mr. Pelletot probably a year after that in the corner of Sherbrooke and Peel Street, and his limousine was parked in front of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and I said, "Mr. Pelletot, your limousine's taking up too much space." But in any event, Mr. Pelletot's very unsavory intervention, I don't think, was particularly helpful. But again, I think it's important to understand that the response to it, which was unanimously negative in the French media, except in his newspaper, the Journal de Montréal, where considerable work was done to try to situate his comments in some kind of context in order to defend the owner of the paper, which is not a very pleasant thing. But other than that, there was unanimous condemnation of Mr. Pelletot. And there have been other incidents. The kosher incident, I think, is one that, again, is not a particularly useful or helpful one. I could go through others. The Raymond Villeneuve type, who is a former FLQ terrorist who is trying to do everything he can to provoke people in the Montreal Jewish community, in particular by appearing at partition rallies and issuing all kinds of threats. But in my view, Mr. Villeneuve is a marginal figure with few people around him, although not to be taken lightly given his record. But I do not think it would be appropriate to assume on the basis of Mr. Villeneuve's behavior that it's symptomatic of deep-rooted, inherent French-Canadian anti-Semitism. I do not think that that's what the phenomenon is about. And then, of course, there's the history of anti-Semitism in Quebec, which I don't think is particularly good, where there's not a particularly good record, especially if we go back to the 1930s and 1940s period, where I can give you a litany of incidents, individuals that later became credible individuals that were involved in anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic movements, some virulent anti-Semitic movements. I'm not referring to Adrien Arcan, who some of you may have read about in one book or another, who's the representative of the Nazi equivalent or party in Canada. I'm referring to people who are not in Mr. Arcan's category, the André Laurendeaus, I could go on, Lionel Groux, etc., who were intellectuals, well-known, relatively well-known in that particular period. And there are those contemporary analysts, authors, historians, etc., who, in writing about that period, are making efforts to draw parallels between the behavior of those individuals and the behavior of Quebec nationalists today. I have a fine example, I suppose, in Jacques Parizeau's Referendum Eve comment about ethnics and money. That said, as despicable and unfortunate as Mr. Parizeau's comment was, and I was the first person, according to some nationalists writing in Le Devoir, to describe Mr. Parizeau's remarks as racist, and I stand by that position. I believe Mr. Parizeau's remark was a racist remark. Not as much the one about ethnics and money as the one that some of you may not have heard, where he said 60% of who we are voted yes. I think that remark smacks more of a racist connotation to it. That said, I do not think it is useful to compare the anti-Semitism in Quebec of the 1930s to the situation in Quebec today with respect to anti-Semitism. I do not think the intellectual elite of Quebec is out in front propagating anti-Semitism in a manner similar or consistent to the way it was done in the 30s. And with all due respect to Esther Delisle, who I think has written a decent piece of work on the period, on the occasions where she makes efforts to draw these analogies with the Quebec of today and the Quebec of the 1930s, frankly, I don't think that intellectually she's on very solid ground. That's an opinion. It's unfortunate that she's not here to defend that point of view. But I do notice across Canada and in the Montreal community, she seems to favor a lot, how should I say, courtiser, court a lot of favor when those analogies are drawn. I do not believe that's the situation in Quebec, while I think it's important to be extremely vigilant about the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, and I think it's important not to downplay it. I think there's more anti-Semitism, somewhat more in Quebec than there is elsewhere in Canada, but I don't think we're living in a situation of virulent anti-Semitism. Politics. Well, I think that everyone knows the politics of the Montreal Jewish community. It's 98% Federalist, 98% committed to Quebec remaining within Canada, as is the majority of the other ethno-cultural minorities, whether it's the Greek community, Italian community, so on and so forth. And, of course, the English-speaking community is also about 98, probably 97% Federalist. The Jewish community is probably 98%. And of course, many Jews are English-speaking, but the Jewish community is powerfully attached to Canada and is very much opposed to a separatist movement that it believes is first and foremost aimed at promoting the interests of the French-Canadian population. That is the view of the, I think, overwhelming majority of the community, and it is on that basis that you see these important expressions of support for federalism at referendum time. Now, at the same time, you also see within the Jewish community an important degree of recognition of the distinct reality, if you wish, or unique reality or character of the French fact as it exists in Quebec. Now, I think that expresses itself in, for example, something like the Charlottetown referendum, where the riding of Darcy McGee, which represents Côte-Saint-Luc and Hampstead, votes over 90%, in fact 92%, in favor of the Charlottetown Accord, which includes some recognition of the distinct character of Quebec. And I appreciate that you'll hear a lot of people from Montreal who travel across Canada, come to Ottawa, and go to Vancouver and go to the United States and say that recognizing distinct society, unique society, will mean that the rights of Anglophones or minorities in Quebec will vanish within no time at all. Well, that notwithstanding, the majority of the Jewish community did indeed support, and does indeed, in my view, support some form of recognition of the unique reality or character of Quebec insofar as the French fact is concerned. Some will argue that's not really what they feel in their gut. In their gut, they would not support that at all. They think, and I've heard from many people in the community, what's the problem with French-speaking people? Why can't they just learn to speak English? I speak 6 languages. Do you speak French? No. Well, learn a 7th. But in any event, the reality is that many in the community are ready to acknowledge, recognize, vote in support of some recognition formula, and I think ideally would like to see the same occur across Canada. That's my national unity message for the evening. But the politics are such that I think it's fair to say amongst many of my colleagues that there's an undercurrent, that people feel that in a very, very heated political debate, and Quebec is and has been for some time, is and will continue to be in this very heated political debate, that there is some undercurrent. When I say undercurrent, that there is a concern that the political situation is sufficiently unhealthy so that the level of optimism about the future isn't as good as it might be. Not strictly, I'm not talking specifically for the Jewish community, although the Jewish community has a heightened sense of nationalist phenomena, but in general. And that's something with which the community has to contend and will have to continue to contend, because the never-ending referendum phenomenon is not ending too soon. That is not to suggest that there will be another referendum around the corner. There may indeed be one in the aftermath of the next provincial election. I don't want to make a prediction about that election, despite recent polls giving the Liberals a 0.2% lead. I think that if an election were held today, the Parti Québécois would win. And thereafter, one would have to see what the polls will show for us to get a sense of which direction that government will go in. But it's committed to holding, we know, another referendum. Will that resolve the issue once and for all? I doubt it. I doubt it will resolve things one way or the other. The Jewish community in Montreal, there will always be an important Jewish community in Montreal, I believe, whether there is a referendum or no referendum. It may not be 100,000, but even if it were less than 100,000, it would still represent one of the largest Jewish communities in North America. It would still have as its neighbor the Ottawa Jewish community. It would still have as its neighbor to the south one of the largest Jewish communities in the world in New York. And that's something to keep in mind for all those people who think that the Jewish community of Montreal is isolated somehow, is not able to defend or take care of its needs, either social, cultural, or political, when it is not living, and I ask people to bear that in mind, is not living in a vacuum with respect to other Jewish communities around it. So those are some of the things I think that need to be taken into consideration with respect to the politics of the political situation of the Montreal Jewish community. Well, let's try something else. You've heard from a number of people in the post-referendum environment, a number of people, including members of the Jewish community, have gone across the country, across North America, and screamed and yelled about the horrible, horrendous, evil situation which the Jewish community, and for that matter, the English-speaking community of Montreal is encountering. They've urged support across North America on the basis of this ugly situation within which we presumably find ourselves for such things as the partitioning of Quebec, at least on a municipal level. And in fairness, I have no position to offer you with respect to that issue because my organization isn't taking one, which I suppose is always helpful for people like me in situations like this. But without commenting on the merits of the issue, because I think it's fair to say for those who are very involved in the political debate, if Quebec's divisible, or if Canada's divisible, then Quebec is divisible. It may sound fine, and I'm again not going to elaborate on that. But if the motivation for this movement, for this series of unity resolutions, is attachment to Canada, that's one thing, and that in fact may be a perfectly normal and laudable thing. If the motivation for it is the ugly, potentially dangerous, volatile situation within which the community is living, that's another thing. And very frequently, that particular approach to the issue is not, I think, a good one in terms of what the motivation for supporting such a course of action should be. As I say, if such a course of action is to be supported, it should be out of the attachment people have to Canada, not out of this negativism or the imminent dangers that the community may or may not encounter if people don't support this particular approach to the issue. I was involved in several issues with which I'm involved at Canadian Jewish Congress in responding to a report in a Munich newspaper that described anti-Semitism in Quebec, that said that French Canadians are inherently anti-Semitic, that anti-Semitism in Quebec is at one of the worst levels in the world in terms of that phenomenon of anti-Semitism. And this particular description of the situation in Quebec, which I called exaggerated in the press, and I stand by it, I believe it is exaggerated. I was actually criticized for using the word exaggerated. Some people felt that that wasn't going far enough to describe this characterization, and had to appear on a television show in French to suggest that it's not my job to go and tell the readership or governments or newspapers of Munich what the situation is in Quebec. That's the job of the public relations people in the Quebec government. They're not doing a good one, I must say. But going across America or elsewhere and basically using as an approach to garnering support for federalism that French Canadians are anti-Semitic, I think is counterproductive. So those are some of the issues that I think describe or summarize the situation of the Montreal Jewish community. Again, all this will be open to different opinion. There is certainly, as I say, an undercurrent that you have to be mindful of. That undercurrent is reflected in the reaction to the Mordecai Richler writings, which I think was also a very unpleasant thing in the request by Michel Gauthier, formerly still partly an Ottawa resident, the former leader of the Bloc Québécois, asking the Canadian Jewish Congress to denounce Howard Galganoff. To be fair, he asked us to denounce him for the statement that separatists were bastards, not denounce him in terms of his philosophical approach to issues. That I would describe as the undercurrent in Quebec that one has to be mindful of. But for the most part, many of you who are either former Montrealers, have friends or family in Montreal, I believe know that Montreal offers a very rich cultural and social environment for Jews as Jews, an unpleasant political environment for non-Jews and Jews alike, and the language situation is often unpleasant, though I must say that it isn't true, as some of my colleagues in Vancouver suggest to me, that you can't speak English on the streets of Montreal. Yes, you can. You can speak it as much as you can speak English on the streets of Ottawa and Hull, and probably more in Montreal than in the streets of Hull. But in any event, those, I think, are some of the observations I would make. I'm not suggesting they are firm realities. Everyone has their own idea of what the reality is or is not, and it's a sport of many to evaluate that reality. It's the subject of many dinner conversations in Montreal and across the country. I know that my wife and myself are in Montreal to stay in Montreal, and the only city to share a secret polichinelle that we've ever contemplated moving to is this one, if we were to leave, but we have no intention of leaving, and I hope we don't. So I'd like to thank you and take any questions you may have.
Questions, please?
Is that your question?
Wasn't there an article a few years back that the French Canadian is not strictly anti-Semitic, but they're the most racist group in the world?
The French Canadian, the most racist group in the world? I mean, I think that's obnoxious. Whoever wrote that, I think it's obnoxious. I think it's an obnoxious generalization. I haven't read it anywhere, but there have been multiple surveys running across all the entire spectrum. Some done by Robert Brim of University of Toronto, some done by Joe Fletcher, also of University of Toronto, which suggest higher levels of anti-Semitism among French Canadians than there are elsewhere in Canada. In fact, this poll by Joe Fletcher that he seemed to parade around quite extensively showed something like 60% of French Canadians had what he called high levels of anti-Semitism. Of course, he had 50% of Ontarians showing something between medium and high levels of anti-Semitism. That's 1 out of 2 people in Ontario. So that particular poll, which I've looked up and down, which I think is one that I give credibility, low level of credibility to, I don't think is a good reflection of the state of anti-Semitism. Robert Brim is probably a bit better in his polling, and he does it on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of, do you like the Jewish community or dislike, 0 to 10, and he gets something like 25% of French Canadians don't like members of the Jewish community, as opposed to the Canadian average being 18 or 17% or something in that neighborhood. But again, I think this polling data that is very popular in Quebec and the rest of Canada, and I think Canada has probably sets records in the extent to which it does these type of polls on attitudes, attitudinal data on different groups' views of Jews or members of visible minorities. I don't know if it's particularly telling. Usually a lot of the polls show very similar levels of tolerance when you measure it by the 14 other questions that they ask across the country. And I don't think it's a fair generalization or a useful generalization to suggest French Canadians are the most racist in the world. I could talk about a lot of other countries in the world where I think there are a lot of populations that are considerably more racist, if one wishes to do that, than are French Canadians. I do think that French Canadians in the 1930s, as influenced by the Catholic Church in particular, and many groups across the world influenced by the Catholic Church and also influenced by the Protestant clergy. I mean, let's be careful. Harbored anti-Semitic sentiment, and I think the world has made progress in many ways, but there's still considerable work to be done in many places in terms of the phenomenon of anti-Semitism. But I would say French Canadians have made considerable progress in that area. And if you compare The newspapers of today, if you wish to use that as a unit of measurement, to the newspapers, the French language newspapers of the 1930s, you'll find a tremendous difference. Today, anti-Semitism in the amongst intellectuals, amongst journalists, amongst business people, amongst educators, is regarded as politically incorrect. It's a taboo. That doesn't mean that it isn't there. It is. But it is, I would say, not the phenomenon it was in the 1930s, and I would not say the majority of French Canadians are anti-Semitic or racist today. I would say a minority. I wouldn't ignore it might be, but that's another issue.
You made some very good points about the political and cultural situation, but one of the things that you didn't really talk about explicitly is the economic situation. And my personal observation is that a lot of people, especially in the 20 to 40 age range, are frustrated and are starting to look even south of the border because of that economic situation.
Yeah, I'm actually sorry to mention that, and I'm glad that you've noted it, because I would say the economic motivation for leaving Quebec is probably the strongest one. When we do surveys in the Jewish community, and we probably do more surveys in Montreal of the Jewish community than is done in the rest of Canada, we ask more questions, to be fair about it, because there are surveys being done across the continent on the Jewish community through the various federation network, but we add something like 30 new questions relating to these debates. And we come back to the economic consideration being the strongest motivating factor for those people 20 to 40 who are leaving. But I also don't, from the work I've done, like to look at the economic issue in isolation of, complete isolation of the political and language issues. In the surveys we've done, by the way, anti-Semitism is at best a factor amongst 1 out of 10 people who leave. But I don't think you can isolate entirely the economic from the political and language-related reasons that people have left. That said, there are many people in the leadership of the community who believe that if people had the right employment in Quebec, they would be motivated to stay there, whatever the political and other conditions are.
The new regulations of Bill 40 coming into effect in January, making the retailers responsible for the labeling, how does your pace of negotiations, do they have to restart, or are they still exempted?
No, they're still exempted. We've gone over that. They called me about 4 or 5 weeks ago on that, and I don't think they want to mess with the. I don't think they want to mess with the community on that particular issue. That's I don't know, being prudent about my comment and the way I've expressed it, but that's my conclusion and the basis of this particular issue as it has evolved. I'm not sure what the impact will be on that. I, by the way, am one of these people who's big on the. I must tell you, I'm big on the cornflakes story. Going back 20 years ago, if you were in Western Canada and you want to talk about a bilingual country, then you wanted the cornflakes boxes. Many French Canadians would complain the cornflakes boxes didn't have bilingual labels on them. So I think there's some legitimacy in labeling bilingually. To the extent it's not possible in certain instances, then the exception should exist, whether it's in the Jewish community or another community. But to the extent that it is possible, and it is possible in many, many, many situations, for a market the size of the Montreal French-speaking market, then I think people should do it. I think if the exporter can do it, you should do it. And I feel the same way about kosher products. There are people in the community, in the Jewish community of Montreal, that would like an exemption all year round for all kosher products. That would involve, you know how many products that would involve not having French labels on in your supermarket? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 33% of all products would not have any French labeling on them because they have a core or MK on them, and that would presume an exemption. So what's the point what's the point of having these labeling laws if we can exempt as much as 33% of products from the labeling, which are products that are consumed by not just Jewish Quebecers, but by many, many other Quebecers as well.
I want to raise a slightly different point. You've been rather optimistic, and I think justifiably so, about the cultural life of the Jewish community of Montreal. I happen to agree with you. I have a son who lives there, and he lives in Mile End, and there's no place quite as mosaic-like as Mile End. However, we're talking about Montreal, notwithstanding pertaining to the metropolis. It's only part of the province of Quebec. Political, if you will, political aura of the province is really generated in Quebec City. This is where one finds the people that we are worried about, we outsiders. And I'd like your view on how the community reacts to Les Pure-Laine, for instance, whom you won't find in Mile End. There are lots of French Canadians there, but I get along with them fine, certainly so does my son and daughter-in-law. But it's those other people, like where there used to be Jews but aren't anymore. There used to be a Quebec City Jewish community, as I well know, for relatives.
Sure.
Where do we stand vis-a-vis the provincial and the...
Okay, well, that's I have to probably answer that question in several parts. I'll try to get it down to two. First of all, I do want to pick up on the point you made about your son getting along quite well with his neighbors, because I did an article, I guess it was in the Ottawa Citizen some 3 months ago, called Living with Bill 101. And in that article, one of the things I referred to was that the situation on the ground in terms of the relationship between Anglophones, if you wish, Anglophone Jews, and non-Jewish Francophones is fairly reasonable, to say the least, as you've indicated. Leaving the politics aside, and many people do that in their day-to-day interaction, the day-to-day interaction is a very, very healthy one, and many people benefit from it. Now, the situation in Quebec City. The Jewish community of Montreal, first of all, I would say, has probably one of the largest bureaucracies in North America. It has got a significant, if not glaring, underrepresentation of persons in the Quebec civil service, and a very large civil service of its own, which provides its many services with government financial support to a very significant extent. We have an educational bureaucracy that's probably bigger than any educational bureaucracy in the continent, including the one in Toronto, with a much bigger population. And through that, there are other affiliated institutions or networks of institutions. So that's one thing to be kept in mind. And so far as our relationship with the government is concerned, in terms of institutional support, it's fairly reasonable. We have significant contact with civil servants in all the major ministries that have some impact on our community, and there's a for perpetuity. No. Is there in the Jewish community? Is there more? How should I say it? It's not curiosity, interest, lack of knowledge about the Jewish community in Trois-Rivières, Quebec City, and elsewhere. Absolutely, there is, and we've created a series of what projects we call regional visits, where leaders of the Jewish community, Greek and Italian communities, go to Three Rivers, Sorel, Chicoutimi, Saguenay, etc. And when you go there, I've discovered that I feel like I'm going to another country, and we're treated. I must say, we are treated like foreign dignitaries, very well treated, in fact, because these particular communities are not accustomed to receiving leadership from the Jewish community. But the very fact of the treatment we receive, I think, is quite a positive signal, because it shows a very high level of curiosity and interest about our community. In contrast to 60 years ago in the Laurentians, for example, in the St. Agathe area, probably don't have to explain where that is to the people here in Ottawa, where there were the reception you would have received, or at least seen visually, was a very unpleasant one. I don't have to tell you about the no dogs or Jews allowed. And today there's a very high level of interest and curiosity. The major obstacle is still the political situation. The more you go out to the regions of Quebec, the more support you'll find for separation. And there is a view amongst those people who follow the debate that the Jewish community and the organized Jewish community is working against separation.
So that's where you're going to encounter one group who dreams of separation and is working tirelessly toward that goal, meeting with another group that is working, presumably, not everyone in that group, but some people in that group working tirelessly against it. And obviously that's not a recipe for good relations. But I must tell you, the individuals whom we do meet who feel that way want to make every effort to persuade us to change our opinion on the issue. Not force us, persuade us to change our opinion on the issue. And we, although I'm not particularly optimistic in certain instances, want to make every effort to persuade these people to change their opinion on the issue. I recently, to the surprise of some of you here, undertook to co-preside something called La Semaine Québécoise la Citoyenneté, Quebec Citizenship Week. It's not political citizenship. I wouldn't have taken it on otherwise, because the only political citizenship I recognize is Canadian political citizenship. It's kind of the citizenship notion as the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship. It's replacing something called Quebec Intercultural Relations Week. That's what it has been for the past 6-7 years. And they offer prizes every year, and the ceremony is going to be in November 10th in Quebec City, blah, blah, blah. And many Federalists have applied for these citizenship prizes, by the way. It's remarkable, especially for the $15,000 one. So that there seems to be no inhibition about that. But I was named as co-president with someone named Jeannette Bertrand, who's a popular French-Canadian talk show host, and the minister, André Boisclair, who is the Minister of Relations with Citizens and Immigration. In launching this particular initiative, we both said, or I said to the people there, that there's one major issue upon which Mr. Boisclair and I profoundly disagree. To which he said, you mean, est-ce que vous voulez dire la couleur de la margarine? You mean the color of margarine? I said, non, c'est pas ça. Mais je vais permettre aux personnes qui assistent à cet événement, à ce lancement, je vais les permettre à deviner la question sur laquelle il y a un désaccord profond entre moi et le ministre. Et c'est évidemment la question d'unité nationale, je n'avais pas besoin de le dire. Mais j'ai quand même dit, parce que le ministre aime parler de consensus, he likes to talk about consensus, j'ai dit parfois le seul consensus, c'est d'être d'accord pour être en désaccord. The only consensus is to agree to disagree. Et j'ai dit, et dans le dizaine d'années que je connais le ministre, j'ai tenté à nombreuses reprises de lui convaincre de changer d'opinion et de se joindre à mon camp, si vous voulez. Et je n'ai pas réussi. Mais par ailleurs, il n'a pas réussi à me convaincre de changer de camp. Et ayant dit tout ça, on a toujours entrepris cette démarche de se convaincre mutuellement de changer d'opinion avec dignité et respect, qui n'est pas nécessairement le cas dans l'ensemble de la population quant à ce sujet. All that to say that in the 10 years that I've known this particular minister, we have, and the many efforts I made to try to convince him to change his point of view on the issue and vice versa, it's been done with dignity and respect, which isn't always the way things unfortunately operate in Quebec. But that's another example of the fact that there's a fair number of people who are trying to convince one another with reasoned arguments to change their point of view. And then there are a number of people who take out the big baseball bat and see if they can slam you with it, or make you feel so uncomfortable that you just don't want to participate in the debate or participate in the life of Quebec anymore. Yeah, sorry.
I guess from what you're saying is that there's no doubt that if the worst came to worst and there was a referendum and Quebec did separate, that there's no reason why a Jewish community couldn't survive in Quebec. But how badly would it be decimated?
Well, I don't want to, in that, I have to be careful. I did this in the Globe and Mail once, and I got on the front page of the Globe and Mail for saying, and I wrote a letter to try to correct it. I said, I don't think sovereignty is a direct threat to the Jewish, Greek, or Italian community. It is a profound threat to all those who want a united Canada and who are uncomfortable with living in a separate Quebec. But what I meant by, and I got in big trouble for this thing, because next day in the Globe and Mail it said, separation, no threat to Jews, says X person, which is not what I was trying to say in that particular comment. What I was trying to say was, I don't think in the aftermath of separation, and I don't think, incidentally, nor do I believe that to the extent there is separation, I'm still not of the view there will be, at least in this century, or this millennium, if you want to stretch it out. Maybe sometime in the next millennium. But to that extent, I do not believe that the community as a community, that Jewish institutions, that Jews as Jews, that pervasive anti-Semitism will break out the moment that Quebec separates. I don't believe that that's what will happen. I, however, do believe that it will be extremely unpleasant for people independent of whether they're Jewish, not Jewish, Greek, Italian, and so forth, which is what I meant to say, Francophones, Anglophones. It will be unpleasant for at least one generation, because it will not go down, if I may use that term, the way some sovereignists have predicted it will, and that is there'll be an easy transition, and finally there'll be harmony and everlasting peace. Today, I think Mr. Bouchard used the term promised land. I wonder where he got that one. That isn't the way it's going to be. This is going to be a powerfully divisive, emotional issue, and I even know from colleagues of mine who are on the other side of the debate that they too believe it will take there'll be one generation of deep wounds that will not be overcome. So I don't know, and plus there are all kinds of other issues to work out. So I don't think the immediate climate will be good, and I do think that some people will choose not to stay. I think it's important to be cautious. When Jews leave, there seems to be this perception that they're leaving because they're Jewish, and I don't think that it's because they're Jewish that they will choose to leave. So I believe there are a variety of other issues.
How are your relations with the language police?
Well, I speak to the director of the OLF once a month. I don't think he was particularly enamored with my using the term language police in that piece I wrote in the Ottawa Citizen, I guess it was probably 6 to 8 weeks ago. But you may find this interesting. I don't necessarily blame the OLF for the stupidity of many of their actions. I think there's a problem in the law which they're enforcing, and in some cases enforcing to the letter. That's at the root of this. If they didn't have to enforce a law that calls for signs to be 2/3 one way and 1/3 the other way, we wouldn't encounter some of these stupidities that I think are generated by that legislation. So on some of the other issues, I'm not convinced the OLF is a completely autonomous body, and many, as are other government agencies, presumably autonomous from the government which has created them. But I think that the behavior of some of the people who are constantly calling the OLF with complaints about stupid matters that are designed more to provoke members of the Anglophone community than anything else is unfortunate. That said, I speak to them. I have to deal, this is a debate I think I had around the kosher issue, and I think I won this part of the debate at least, in the very contentious issue of negotiating with, the very principle of negotiating with the language police, because we know what the language police is a euphemism for. They're representatives of the government of Quebec, and I, in my capacity as director of the Canadian Jewish Congress for Quebec, have to deal with the government of Quebec, the duly elected one, elected by the, well, not numerical majority necessarily of the population, but at least in a majority of the ridings of the province of Quebec. And that's the way it is, and that's the way it has been from the days of Saul Hayes, for those of you who are familiar with him, to today. So I'm simply following in the tradition of continuing to negotiate with them. I was asked, I wish the tape were on, but it's on, what the hell. I was asked by a minister last week, Quebec government minister, to meet privately with another minister with whom I have deep differences with. I will not name the minister on the tape. I was asked to meet with this gentleman to try to resolve some differences I've had with him since the referendum. And I'm reluctant to do it, I must tell you, not for a whole set of reasons based on what I think of this particular individual. I won't characterize what I think of this government minister. He's quite an important person in his own right. But I am willing to meet with this individual, as I said, in my capacity, I think it's my obligation to meet with these individuals who are in important decision-making positions, who make decisions that affect our community, with whom we have to maintain relations, with whom we've traditionally maintained relations. When René Lévesque was premier, when Jacques Parizeau, who I think very little to nothing of, was premier, but who I had the opportunity to meet with and exchange views with. I don't think I made progress, but that's the way it is. You don't make have to make progress with your friends, to use another analogy which I don't accept. But between Quebec and a place that's very dear to us, you have to negotiate with the people with whom you have differences with, and often very important differences with. It's easy to negotiate with your friends or persuade your friends.
One more question. That's the clock's up there on the wall.
Oh, sorry.
You had a question before?
I'm just curious. Oh.
I'm sorry. Short question.
You can take two and then I'll let you after.
All right, 2 questions.
You had mentioned the immigration of some 40,000 Jews from Montreal and the immigration of some 15,000.
15 to 20.
Reducing the figure by about 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
What is the complexion of the group that left, the makeup of that group, and the group that came in? And has that changed the character of the Jewish community in Montreal?
Yeah, that's, let me take that and then I'll take the next one, because it's the character of the Jewish community of Montreal is definitely changing. It has actually changed constantly from one wave of immigration to the next. But the more recent changes, as is the case for Canadian Jewish communities across the country, particularly the larger ones, which are characterized by British immigration, initially British origin, persons from Britain, and then Eastern European Jews from different countries, from one wave to the next wave. But in Montreal, again, I think there is a distinction, and the distinction over the past 25 years has been the arrival of some 20,000 Jews from North Africa. And they've, I think, modified the character of the community, both socially and culturally and linguistically, for that matter. They adapted more readily to the language situation than have many other members of the Jewish community. We also now have the Russian immigration, but there is Russian immigration in Toronto as well. The irony, although, of the situation with the Russian immigration, to give you an example of the way in which it plays out, I was discussing this in humor, in a humorous way, with my wife 2 nights ago over Shabbat dinner. I was saying that, this is said humorously, my wife is from Morocco, and I said, when the Sephardic Jews arrived, they were extremely well treated by the Ashkenaz community. We treat our minority well, so to speak. But now I was attending services. This year I switched from the Merkaz Sepharad, which is the shul that I go to, a Sephardic shul I go to. It's important to have one Ashkenaz at the synagogue, and I went to the Y, which is also, our Y has a Sephardic synagogue, and upstairs there is a separate room for the Russian group, for the service for the Russian Jewish population of the Snowden area, of about 100, and another service for the Iraqi Jewish community. So I said to my wife, well, you see, we treat our Sephardic community well. You have your own large synagogues, and you put the Russians up in a small room, up on the 2nd floor. So here's the situation going full circle, you see, because now if you go to the Sephardic Jewish day schools, the Francophone Jewish day schools, where you'll find most of the Russian Jews, you see the mix of the Francophone North African Jewish population and the young Russian Jewish population that's evolving. So that's just one example of yes, what I would say is a very different demographic and cultural situation in the Montreal Jewish community. There are a lot of marriages now, a higher number of marriages taking place between Ashkenaz and Sephardic Jewish community members, and that's going to have an important impact on the on the future of our community. I don't think there's any question about that. I always, when I had a debate that I participated in this morning, and I was talking about the various ways in which people define themselves in Montreal, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish. In Montreal, you may be aware, in the early 20th century, Jews were considered Protestants for education purposes. So we're kind of, in fact, at that particular time, some Jewish politicians said they wanted Jews educated with a Protestant mentality. So when the Francophone Jews arrived, since the French population was unaccustomed to Jews speaking French, they described them as des Juifs catholiques. They were Catholic Jews. And today, you look at the situation that I find myself in. The language I first learned and still understand is Yiddish. So from the standpoint of the census takers, I guess I would be considered in Quebec vernacular to be an allophone. That's what they call those people who are neither of English nor French mother tongue. And the language I speak most frequently at home, because my wife, my French is a little bit better than my wife's English, is French with my kids. So from the standpoint of the census takers that want to know what language you speak most frequently, I would be French. I think in English. So this is some of the complex situation that you encounter in Quebec.
I don't know if I should throw in a kind of contentious point at the end. I'm originally from Montreal, and I'm here now. And I think one of the things that's discouraged me most about the future of things is some of the attitudes I've seen reverse here. The attitudes of the English towards French. And I guess a good example I could give is the city of Nepean, which is about a 3-minute drive from here, and I guess maybe 30% of people in this audience live in Nepean. You cannot put up a French sign in a publicly owned building in Nepean. Best example of which is the Center Point Theatre. There's been efforts being trying to get that concept changed, but you cannot use French in public buildings in Nepean. And we could give other examples too. And this has been discouraging to me because if we expect the French to change their attitudes in Quebec, I think we have to set the example to the English people here in Ontario, Ottawa, sort of modify their attitude as well.
Yeah, no, I don't know the situation well enough to comment on what goes on here relative to those issues. I think, on balance, however, there is some legitimacy to recognizing the French fact, as I say, particularly in the Quebec context. I do think that in the North American context, French is threatened. I don't believe it's threatened because of the protections that the government has in place, some of which I think are exaggerated, but some of which I think are legitimate. Without those protections, I don't think that French, in Montreal at least, would be a dominant language. Again, all the while stressing that some of the exaggeration needs to be trimmed. Insofar as the rest of Canada is concerned, my major problem when I travel across the country, it's twofold. Number one, it's the perception that you can't speak English in Montreal, which is ridiculous, but is a very deeply rooted perception. And the other problem I have, which is a more profound one, I think, is the reduction of the importance of French. And this isn't just in the Jewish community, it's in many communities across the country. When I meet people in Winnipeg of Ukrainian origin, they basically feel that French is not a relevant language as compared to Ukrainian in Manitoba. And in Vancouver, I must tell you, the thing that I hear most, particularly outside the Asian community, I rarely hear it in the Asian community, is that Mandarin is the language of the future. French is not a relevant language. And why not recognize Chinese if you're going to recognize French? To which my answer is, the country wasn't built last year. This country has a history to it. This country does have an important French reality within it, and there needs to be some acknowledgement of that. And I think what destroys the country, and that is whether in BC, here, or elsewhere, and in Quebec, is looking at things within one's own backyard alone, and not looking at something as a broader Canadian reality. And there's too much of that in the country right now, across the country. But we'll have to see what happens.
last question.
Okay.
Short.
This was advertised as the effect on Montreal, but also on Ottawa, and as an outsider standing back. What has been it'd be interesting to hear what, in your opinion, has been the effect on Ottawa of the goings on in Montreal?
Yeah, I was trying to determine what was meant by that second part of the title, actually. I think, for example, the fact that your stadium for Senators hockey games is more full, whatever, than it might otherwise be without the Montreal presence, especially when the Montreal Canadiens come and play the Ottawa Senators, like they did last night when they win, which I'm very happy about, by the way. But insofar as the impact on the Ottawa Jewish community, I don't know what the direct impact is other than the Montrealers who arrive and become members of that community might be. There's, I suppose, ways in which the Ottawa Jewish community can be helpful to the Montreal Jewish community politically, particularly on the unity issue, that could be discussed more thoroughly. But other than that, I need a couple weeks to think about it, and maybe you'll invite me back at some time in the future, and I'll write an article or thesis on it. A thesis, I doubt, but an article maybe.
Bill Goldberg, will you come forward to thank the speaker?
I call you Jack or Mr. Jedwab?
Jack.
I'm Mel Goldberg.
Nice to meet you.
It was a great pleasure to listen to a concise and, shall we say, incisive analysis of the Montreal situation and the Jews. I understand that the present situation must be very uncertain for you. I have many encounters with Québécois. I'm a volunteer at the Museum of Civilization in Hull. And our staff are mainly French Canadians who have a great difficulty in coming to grips with the English fact. One of our courses involves history, the history of Canada. And every time our instructor talks to us, and there is a big dichotomy in 1759, she has a great deal of difficulty in using the word conquest, English taking over. There is a deep, bitter, and I use the word bitter advisedly, feeling among intellectually trained Franco-Canadians who grew up in the atmosphere of Lionel Groux and against the presence of English-speaking people in Quebec. I find this in Hull. Most of these people, of course, come from other places than Hull, but they are the cream of Quebec intellectuals. They are all university graduates of many levels. And I bring that to your attention for whatever it may be worth. I noticed how careful you were not to infringe upon the sensitivities or possible sensitivities of French Canadians in the way you were speaking. It is very important that we tiptoe through the tulips of controversy very carefully, and I can appreciate that. And I understand it. I want to thank you on behalf of everyone. I'm privileged to present you with a little token of our appreciation. And again, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. The doctor is going to make the 10 o'clock bus back. Gedalia will be taking back. Just couple quick messages. One, wish all the snowbirds bon voyage to their annual winter southern journey. Remember, membership is being sold at the back door. I want to thank you. I want to thank Shirley and Elaine for helping out tonight. I want to remind the directors of the meeting on October the 30th, 7:30, and Shirley has a very quick message.
Oh, this will take 1 minute. I would like to, in November, we Canadians will celebrate a century of the Canadian Jewish press. Canadian Jewish press. In 1897, the Jewish Times began publishing in an effort to publicize the plight of Alfred Dreyfus. This was the beginning of the Canadian press, Jewish press in Canada. The National Library will mark this with an exhibition of Jewish press. I invite you to all come out to see the 5-week exhibition, and especially to come out on the evening of Wednesday, November the 12th at 7:30 p.m. when Mordechai Ben-Dutt, the editor of the Canadian Jewish News, will speak. Refreshments will be served. Everyone is invited.
Thank you, Shirley. Thanks, Stuart Lazier. Thanks, Mel Goldberg, for introducing and thanking the speaker. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Refreshments are in the back. Bon voyage, snowbirds.
I think it's all right. The problem is, I don't know whether you want to have 4 people who authorize signatures or
Yes,
3.
no, there's 4.
You do want 4.
Yeah.
And when I have restructured it completely. The board shall designate by name.
Just hold it. Okay, read it out.
My suggested revision of 7B is as follows. Quote, the board shall designate by name, comma, in a manner, in a motion passed at the first executive meeting following the annual meeting of the society, comma, 4 signing officers for all banking purposes. Sentence. The signatures of any 2 of the designates are required for all negotiable instruments.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.